Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Fellowship of Fandom, the Rings of Power after show brought to you by the Agents of Fandom. As always, I am one of your hosts, TJ, aka Fat Thor, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Zen, from the Listen 3000 podcast. Zen, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm good, man. I'm happy to be back to talk another Rings of Power episode, man. This was a good one, so I'm here.
Dude, I don't know why, it feels like forever since we did the last one, even though it's only been a week. It felt like a really long week. Maybe just...
It did.
I was like, maybe it was just me. I was super busy, but it felt like it was a long week. So I'm excited to be back in Middle Earth. We got another really, really good episode. Not as action-packed, I would say, as some of the previous ones, but some really, really great moments. And I think really sets the stage for where we're going to be going, later into the season.
Mm-hmm.
So to start this off, as always, I just want to get your quick thoughts, overall thoughts of this episode. Did it hit for you? Was this one that, compared to the previous four, would you say that this one is kind of lower on your list, or did it hit the same for you?
It was cool. I think it did with the last episode, we got a lot of action, fights, and stuff like that. This one, I felt like it was a lot more character and plot movement. We got a lot more stuff with the rings, a lot more stuff with the dwarves. I feel like it covered different ground than the last one. You know what I mean? So I felt like I had a good time with this one for sure.
Yeah, I 100% agree. While there wasn't as much action, again, I think we got a lot of really interesting things that move us forward. And I think for me, even though there's no action, the show did a really great job in this episode of keeping the tension high. Even though there's not a fight or a battle, for me, I still felt like the tension through the episode. As we're seeing the influence of Anatar over the dwarves and Númenor. And I would also say, for me, this isn't even really a criticism. I think criticism is a harsh word for this, because it's not really that. But we talked about in our first episode, covering the first three episodes, how we felt that Númenor and the dwarves kind of took a backseat a little bit to the story of the elves. And for me, last episode and this one really kind of solidified that, and I thought really brought balance to the entire cast. We talked last episode how they started to really balance things out. I think this one kind of really again, kind of solidified that balance for me, and it really felt like everyone is getting their proper time to shine. Even though we are, again, first four episodes spent a lot of time with the elves, it feels like we're now getting the same, amount of Númenor and dwarves, and they're balancing it all really well.
Yeah, I feel like they have a lot of ground to cover. You know what I mean? I feel like they kind of got to pick and choose each episode where they decide to go. Because, again, not only do we have the elves, and then we got Númenor, and then we got the dwarves, but then we didn't get no Nori and Stranger this episode. So it's you kind of get a trade-off. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, or we didn't get any Isildur and Estrid and Arondir. So,
yeah.
Like I said, we just can't fit everybody in every episode. You're right. It's like you said, we're dealing with a large cast here, and especially, I feel like in season one, everyone was more together. We had, pretty much all the elves were together. Pretty much all Númenor was, together. But now we have, what is it? At least 5 or 6 different groups of people. We're switching. We have Elrond, Galadriel, Gil-galad, that little crew. We got a Region. We got Khazad-Dúm. We have, we saw, Isildur, Estrid, Arondir are in that Pelentíri or whatever. And then we also have everyone in Númenor. So it's I can't expect them to fit everybody in one episode. So I think, while it was, again, criticism's a hard word, but in the first 3, it kind of felt like, again, they took a backseat. It really feels like I see the vision now. We're kind of switching off episode by episode, catching back up with everybody else. So like you said, we don't get Stranger this episode. We don't get Estrid and Isildur, but I'm sure next episode we'll deal heavily with them, since we didn't get this. And really quickly, I know we're kind of going off on a tangent already, starting off this episode. Great way to start. But it does bring up a point I was talking to with Rose, actually, Rose, who we had on our last episode, and he was asking me like, how come the dwarves can get to Eregion so fast, but it takes like the elves forever, right? Like that message from Gil-galad, right? And I was explaining to him, and I think again this kind of goes to a little bit what we're talking about, how we're switching from all these different groups of people. Is I feel like the show could do a little better with showing us some more maps and like some more geography. Like we get a little bit of that from like scene transitions, but I really feel like that would help a lot. And that's also something that's like very important in Tolkien's writings. Like the Lord of the Rings has maps in both the front and the back of the book. The Silmarillion has its own map. Like maps and the geography of Middle Earth does play a major role in the story. Like when you're reading the stories, knowing where things are like, kind of gives you an idea of how long these journeys are. So again, criticism's a hard word, but I think they could do a little better with that, of kind of showing where things are, because I think it does get a little confusing of like, like Rose was saying, why the hell, like the door in this episode, Durin literally just shows up in Eregion like
Yeah,
the same day, but then we have Elrond and them literally like hauling ass through the forest to get back to Gil-galad.
yeah.
So all that aside, like I said, I think I would like to see that a little bit more moving forward, maybe a little bit more geography stuff, or even if Amazon just like, I think it would be cool if they just like released a map, like just like
That would
put
be
a
dope.
picture on on the Instagram or whatever, like, hey, like here's a map of the second age, like where we're at in the show. I think that would be cool.
Hmm. Not for sure.
But we've tangent enough even before diving into this episode. So let's get into the episode. We begin this episode in Khazad-Dúm. Like I said, the episode is very heavily dwarf and Eregion centered, and we see that King Durin is uh basically dealing with this new power that he's gotten with the seven rings. He takes one of the rings and uses it to find a place where they can find sunlight. So we talked about
Mhm.
in previous episodes, a big thing going on in Khazad-Dúm right now is all the sunlight is gone. So he finds sunlight. And later on in the episode, we also see that he offers the other rings to the other dwarf lords. So for people who may not know, in Khazad-Dúm, King Durin is like the king of Khazad-Dúm, but there's other sects of dwarves in the city, and they all kind of, have their own like leaders and dwarf lords. So he offers them all rings, but in exchange for some of their gold. He's not giving that up for free. And we also see him being very protective over this ring. Later, we see when he's talking to Narvi, he straight up accuses him of stealing it. And Narvi's like, whoa, bro, like it's right on the table, dude. It's right there. Like, and so I was starting this off. What do you think about King Durin and like what's going on with him? What is the ring doing to him, and how you see it?
I feel like the ring might be messing with his mind a little bit, man. I don't want to go as far as saying corrupting him, but like it's definitely like twisting up his mind. And I feel like also maybe just even him having the power to do things he couldn't do before is also going to his head a little bit. So maybe it's a little bit of both of those things. And it's like, I don't know. I'm interested to see how it goes because obviously we see, his son peeped what's going on a little bit. So like, I'm interested to see like if he'll ever come to his senses at all, or if he'll just keep trekking down his path of like this power that he has. You know what I mean? And what would that do to the dwarves and as a whole?
So you think it's leading him down a dark path then, this ring?
Yeah. Definitely a dark-ish path, or like just like I feel like he might be losing himself a little bit. You know what I mean? Not necessarily evil, but like just like you know he's losing sight of the bigger picture. It's just like, yo, I got this ring now. It's powerful. Like I can do all this stuff. Like, and he seems like it's making him a little paranoid. Like he's like, yo, you stole it, or you don't understand. Like I got it. Like you know what I mean. So I'm just interested to see where that's gonna go for him.
Yeah, and I know you haven't watched the original trilogy, the movies, but for those out there watching and listening that have, this King Durin's whole like relationship with this ring, at least what we are beginning to see, very to me reminiscent of Bilbo. and Bilbo was the first person, not the first person, but was the original person who had the One Ring, which is basically what the whole original trilogy is about. But we see in those movies, Bilbo is very protective of the ring, and same with Gollum. Like they call it, it's they're precious, and like they hide it away. Like there's scenes of Bilbo where like Gandalf asked to see it or something, and like he like is like, but it's mine, right? And I feel like that King Durin is definitely reminding me of that right now, like going down that path. And we see that he does have this like crazy, almost obsession with it, almost immediately. And I think it's super interesting how he later on in the episode, when Durin kind of confronts him about the ring, he tells him like, I can see like the mount, like I can see all the wealth underneath this mountain. Like we think that we can speak to the mountain, like we haven't even touched the surface of it. Which I like. Yes, it's definitely taking him down a like dark path, but we also got to remember, like, Khazad-Dúm was not in a great situation just a couple days ago. And now you have this power that could potentially save your entire kingdom and bring you guys more power. Like, it's not a hard sell. You know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily blame King Durin. And something I want to bring up really quickly, just in case people watching, listening at home maybe are a little confused on this, just shed a little bit more light on it. But the rings themselves, really, the main thing of like the rings have many different kind of powers. They do different things. We talked a little bit about the elven rings in one of our previous episodes. But really the main thing of it is they allow Sauron to have control over who wears them. So like if you wear a ring, Sauron can see into your mind and like ideally influence it. So like men, that's why we'll talk about this more in depth, but we see in this episode Celebrimbor is very hesitant to make the rings for men, and that's because they are the most corruptible. They're the most easily to be influenced. So they put it on, boom, immediately you're Sauron's puppet. But with the dwarves, it's interesting because yes, they like that's the goal of the ring is again to open up the mind of King Durin to Sauron. But it says in the books that the how do they word it? Like the wants of dwarves are like a mystery. Like no one, you know what I mean? Like what the dwarves hold dear in their heart is like kind of particular to them, and so they're not really corruptible. Like you can't really corrupt a dwarf because again the things that they want is like only understood to dwarves. So while the rings don't let Sauron control their minds, it unlocks this need, like this greed in the dwarves. So like again the ring still has power over them, but it doesn't go as far as, like I said, letting Sauron like becoming minions of Sauron, but it just corrupts them, and it like unearths this like greed that dwarves all inherently have. I mean, we see that they're miners, they love jewels and gold, so like they already have a little bit of this, but the ring just like accentuates it. Next up, we got to talk about the rings of power, the new rings of power. So Anatar is pressing Celebrimbor to make these 9 rings of men, and we see that they're actually celebrating with the dwarves, and they unveil the doors of Durin, who fans of the movies, books will remember as the same doors that the Fellowship took to enter the Mines of Moria. And so again, sorry, I'm losing my brain here. But again, Celebrimbor is very, very hesitant of making these rings. Anatar brings it up to him again, and he's like, they're, men are too corruptible. We'll talk about this later. And Anatar was like, no, we're going to talk about this now. And I was like, oh shit. Like I love Charlie so much as Sauron, like Sauron / Anatar. I think he is just like, he plays that deceiver so well, like we talked about before, where it's like we know he's a bad guy, but he's been like so like cordial with Celebrimbor and the elves. Like when he like kind of shows his true colors, it's like still kind of surprising a little bit. Yeah. And he also gives a really shout to other great men from history. He mentions Elrondil, who is actually Elrond's father. And
Mm.
then he also mentions Baron, who readers of the books will remember from the story Baron and Luthien, which is a man who falls in love with an elf and actually battles Morgoth to save her and the Silmaril. So great story. Go check that out. But he mentions these in an attempt to kind of, again, persuade Celebrimbor and like we'll see like men aren't all right, like there's some good ones, and he said we're gonna take the best and the most noble, and Celebrimbor is like, sorry bro, you know what I mean, like I'm sorry dude, and Antar's like, fine, I'll straight up Thanos moment, I'll do it myself, right? So what, again, not knowing like the, you know, from the movies and stuff, like all this being fresh to you, not really knowing like where the nine rings, you know, how that plays into the story, how did you feel about just like Anatar's whole demeanor during this, like his decide? We'll get into our next point is with him and Murdania and all that, so we can
Mm-hmm.
go straight into that. Yeah, just like how his influence is growing over Celebrimbor.
I feel like it's interesting, man. I feel like you said before, deceiver. You know what I mean? Like, so like that first half when they first link up, it's like he's kind of telling him everything he wants to hear. Like it's like, yo, I'm trying to help. Da, 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 da. Now it seems like he's really trying to assert some power and some control. Like, nah, we're gonna do it how I want to do it. We're gonna get these rings done. I don't care what you're feeling. Like it's happening. Like you said, I'm gonna do it myself type time. So it's like I feel like it's interesting how he's slowly kind of taking control of the whole situation with these rings, and he's not letting Celebrimbor like slow this down. Like it's like, yo, I don't care how you feel. You got a conscience now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, nah, like we about to do this. So
Like,
I
where
think
was
that's
that when
interesting.
we made the other rings?
Exactly. So now it's like, nah, like we doing this. So I think it's interesting. Like you said, Charlie Vickers is doing a great job as Sauron. Question: It in the movies does Sauron have a fit? Like have a, I know you were telling me about the eye, but does he ever get a human form again in the movies at all?
No, so in the movies, the first scene of the first movie
Mm-hmm.
picks up it picks up basically at like the culmination of all this shit that we're seeing right now. So it
Gotcha.
opens up with a big war in Mordor, and it's
Mm-hmm.
Gil-galad, Elrond, Isildur, and Isildur's dad, Elendil,
Mm-hmm.
and they all charge. It's a huge battle, and Sauron comes out and fights in that battle, and he's like, that's probably the picture. If you've looked up a picture of Sauron,
With
that's
the
probably
armor and
what
all
you've
that.
seen with the,
Right.
yeah, the armor, the big helmet, the mace. So that was his final form before he was defeated in that war, and then he became the Eye, like we talked about before. And
Gotcha.
again, that kind of is something that this series has fleshed out a little bit, is how Sauron reforms and retakes his power.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, but that battle is basically the culmination of all of this stuff that we're like, that's where we're headed. That's where this is all going to head and end. And so when we see him in that armored form, the reason he's like that is because after the events of all this, he can't be Anatar anymore because like he's
Mm-hmm.
discovered, right? And I don't want to get into too much spoilers. People who have read the books know what I'm talking about, but there's an event
Right.
that happens that prevents Sauron from ever becoming Anatar again. Like he can never take what we talked about, the fair form. He can
Mm-hmm.
never take a fair form again. So he takes a form of just pure evil, and that's when he's armored and suited the hell up. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I think we talked about this last week, but just very quickly, the reason he's an eye after that is because he put so much of his own power into making the rings that he didn't have once he was defeated that like third, fourth time, whatever time it was, he
Mm-hmm.
didn't have enough to reform like we saw in episode 1 to reform a physical body. So he
Mm-hmm.
takes the shape of this just menacing dark eye, which I've heard different people, you'd have to do some more research on this. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I've heard people say that that's like part of his true form. So like we talked about, like the Valar, the Maiar, what Sauron is. They're not like people. They're like gods, angels, right? And like the eye is a representation of his like true form, which is just darkness, which I think leads us perfectly into our next topic of discussion with Mardania. So Sauron, Anatar goes off to make these rings, says he'll do it himself, and we see him and the other smiths working away on these rings. And one of Celebrimbor's assistants, who we've seen here and there throughout the couple episodes, her name's Mardania, and she is resizing one of these rings, and it makes her disappear. She just, boop, gone, disappears. And Celebrimbor comes down, is like, what the hell is going on, right? And like things start flying around the forge. A hammer like pretty much coming for Celebrimbor's head, and he stops it, and he's able to take the ring off her finger, which again then reveals that it was her, like invisible. And she is just freaking out, like she's sweating. Which shout out to that actress. I don't have the name up in front of me right now, but I thought she did really great in this scene, like the terror in her face. But she says that she was transported to like this land of shadow, and that she sees this just dark like creature engulfed in flames, and like I think she says like it stinks of death, and that it's been among them this entire time, and that it is in the forge with them and has been with them this whole time. And I loved this scene. I think this one might be one of my favorite scenes of this episode. Again, going into like seeing like what the rings do, like the influence of what the rings are. So what do you think Mardania saw in that vision?
I got a theory. I honestly think it probably was Sauron, like a version of him or something like that. I feel like that's when she started describing it. I'm like, I feel like that's what it is. And then when they had that conversation, like, yo, don't tell anybody what you saw. I'm like, yo, yeah, nah, I think she's seen something. Maybe like even also like maybe a vision or something like that as well. Of what they got going next. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money, and I think, like you said, I think she saw Sauron. Like she saw. So he even explains later in this episode. He talks to Mardania about this, and he tells her that in the light of the unseen world, things appear as they truly are. And he actually even accuses Celebrimbor of being this. So he's telling her that what she saw is Celebrimbor. But I take that as, again, she saw Sauron's true form, because she was in this like dark, I forget what they call it. There's a word for it, but like this dark realm or whatever. And that's why she says like it's been here all along, and being Anatar. And this also goes back, again, talking about the power of the rings, people who have watched the original trilogy. This is basically the same thing that we see with the Witch King and the Nazgul, when in the first movie Frodo gets stabbed by one of the Nazgul's daggers, and he sees them as like ghosts. And when Frodo puts the ring on, he goes into like this kind of shadowy place. That's exactly what we're seeing. That's what Mardania is seeing, and that is one of the things that corrupts men when they wear the rings. Is they have this power to I think they call it like the veil of the unseen world. They can see past the veil, right? And so again, I loved this moment. I think it again just kind of accentuates Sauron's influence. Again, we see him like influencing Mardania, telling him like, yeah, that was Celebrimbor, and we need to watch over him because the work is like getting to his mind. So I just love that. Again, I just thought it was super creepy. I think it really adds a lot of layers to how powerful these devices are, and how powerful Sauron / Anatar is as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Before we go on to our next point that we forgot to mention, going along with this whole corruption and the power of the rings, we see that Anatar Durin comes and accuses them of basically tampering with the rings. And when Celebrimbor asks Anatar about this, he says like, well, yeah, we both did. And he says that by them lying to Gil-galad and not telling him about the rings, that imbued deceit into the 7 dwarven rings, and that is
Mm.
why that the dwarf rings don't work.
Do you think that's true? Yeah. Okay.
Well, yes and no. So
Okay.
I think it's true in the sense of like, yes, the rings were influenced by deceit,
Right.
but that deceit was Sauron. Like it was yeah, that's what that again going. I'm getting mixed up with my words. I'm getting so excited, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're talking about when we talk about again the great deceiver. It's like his
Mm-hmm.
lies aren't really lies, but they are. It's like yes, him Celebrimbor lying to Gil-galad definitely made the forging of the rings deceitful. Yes, but we see specifically that before Anatar throws the mithril into the forge, he holds it in his hand for a second. And he even gives it like a little, like closed his
Mm-hmm.
eyes, did a little chant to it or something, whispered some sweet nothings in its ear or something. And he throws it into the, so it's like he 100% like influenced the mithril himself. But again, he brings it to Celebrimbor in a way to where Celebrimbor feels the guilt of this, and that
Mm.
further drives him down this path. And we see that even later. We'll jump ahead a little bit just because I feel like we should stay on the same vein. But
Okay.
we jump ahead later when he does decide to create the 9. So he agrees to create the 9 rings of men, and he says that basically he says that they need to create these rings to bring balance to the whole project, that
Mm.
they screwed up with the 7 rings, and that by making the 9 they can capture the power of the 3 elven rings and redeem the 7 dwarven rings. So in his mind, and again the way that Anatar presents this to him, is that if they make the 9 rings of men, it'll bring balance to the 7 dwarven rings that they kind of screwed up, right? And it will make it okay. Like, okay, we kind of screwed up here, but if we make these, it'll all be good, right? So, I mean, that's not a good plan, dude.
I don't think so neither.
I say,
It sounds ridiculous to me, but
yeah. Let me get
they're
your
gonna
thoughts
cook.
on this.
Yeah, it doesn't balance out to me. I don't get
Yeah,
I don't get how that balances it out. I feel like that's just gonna create more problems. But I feel like that's probably what Sauron wants anyway. And I
yeah.
feel like Celebrimbor is so guilt ridden that he's just gonna any solution that Sauron brings to him, he's probably just gonna take it and just like, all right, then let's do that then. You know what I mean? And try to like bring balance. But it's
Yeah.
definitely not gonna bring balance at all. Like
Like
it's
I
just
said,
gonna be more issues.
that's just not good math in my mind.
Nah,
But I
nah.
mean, I think it also too speaks to a point that we talked about in one of our other episodes is Celebrimbor's pride and uh his mission to create something of note that will be remembered in history. And for him, I think he says it like to imbue a part of himself into his creations. And I think that when Anatar and Durin, when they bring up even the notion that his creation could have been flawed, he's like, I have to fix it. Right? Like I can't let that be my legacy. Like, oh, my legacy is gonna be 3 elfin rings that were good and then 7 that were shit. So I think again, going back to why Anatar Sauron is the great deceiver, it's he's speaking exactly to the right buttons of Celebrimbor to know where to push him down this path and blind him to what's going on. Because this could just be how I read it, but in the scene that we're talking about, when Celebrimbor is telling the other smiths about how they're going to make the new rings, the other elves are like, I don't know about this, dude. And Anatar's like, it's cool, everybody. Like, it's gonna be great, right? And Celebrimbor goes up to his office, and he's like, kind of shaken. Like, again,
Yeah.
maybe that's how I read the scene, but it feels like he's like, fuck, what am I doing? Like, am I doing the right thing here, right? So I think it's really, again, it's playing on Celebrimbor's worst qualities in the best way, in a way that's blinding him, and even he's realizing like how much he's being blinded by this.
No, I definitely took that away from that scene as well. Like he got to the desk and put his head down. I'm like, yeah, nah, he knows this this is not kosher, man. This is not what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And I think he also feels like he's just gone too far. Like whether or
Yeah.
not he's seeing the danger of it, I think he's just feeling like I've gone so far now, I have to finish this. And like I don't know what that outcome's going to be, but I have to see it through. That's like kind of what I got from that. But something we didn't talk about that is heavily featured in this episode is Númenor. So we get a lot more Númenor in this episode again. And we talked about this last time, but something I really love about these Númenor scenes, at least for me, is it really feels like, again, talking about seeing Sauron slash Anatar's influence over the elves. I feel like when we see Númenor, we're seeing that, like how that influence is spreading even across the sea to where, Sauron's not even there, but what he's done and like his deception, his lies are affecting them all the way over there. And we see the first scene I want to talk about really quickly is Pharazone and his son. It's kind of where we open up this the Númenor section of this episode, and they're looking over the island and they're looking at the Tower of Erisea. So what that is, for people who don't know, is an island that sits on the coast of Valinor. And we talked about before, Valinor is where the gods live. And Pharazone sees this as like disrespect, really. Like he's looking at this tower and he talks about how it's basically a reminder to the men of Númenor that they will never be immortal like the elves, and that they'll never be accepted into the shores of Valinor like the elves are, which is something that's very important for Númenorians. We talked, I think, a little bit about this in our 1 through 3 recap, and the sense of, the men in Númenor are ultimately not at peace with themselves, similar to the elves in Eregion. And the pridefulness of men, and we talked about like the kind of corruption of men. And also, just really quickly, when I say men, I'm referring to just like the race of men, not men specifically. But again, that's like their whole undoing, is that they're jealous and that they're corruptible. They're corrupted by this idea that they'll never be as good as the elves, and they like hold this grudge to them. That's why there's this whole beef within the city of the faithful and the non-faith. The people who are the faithful are ones who still believe in their alliance to the elves and their friendship to the elves. And so his son is like, dude, like being king's not good enough for you, bro. And Pharazone basically tells his son, he's like, yo, you're gonna do what I tell you, or like you're dead to me. Like that's basically what the deal is. So before we move on to some of the bigger moments in Númenor, I just want to get your thoughts on Pharazone and his son, which I hate that kid so much.
Yo,
We've talked about
same.
this. We talked about this on the House of the Dragon show, and like when we say
Hmm.
we hate a character, that means like the performance is phenomenal. So
Yeah.
shout out to the actor. I'm pulling up his name right now, but shout out
Hmm.
to Leon Wadham, which I'm probably saying that wrong, but he is a great actor, because man, do I hate his character. He is such a little prick, dude. But I mean, it's like we see his dad, right? So we see
Yeah.
why he turned out how he turns out. But what did you think of, again, that just kind of their relationship and this, what's the word, the slight that Pharazone feels from just like the elves and the gods themselves?
I feel like it explains a lot. Um, Again, me not being super familiar with the movies and the books, seeing how they even the past episodes, how the people in Numenor like even speak on the elves, and they find out about the, what is it, the crystal, like the little ball thing that the elves they gave them, just little things like
Yeah,
that. It just
the
explains so much why their
Pelentíri.
relationship is so right. It just explains why their relationship is so messed up. You know what I mean? So it's just like that just gave me more context for that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this is why it's so crazy. And then even further getting deeper into, I'm sure that's where we go next. Getting
Mm-hmm.
deeper into the episode with Kemen and the things that he does, it also explains a lot of that as well. Like some of his feelings, his jealousies, and things of that nature. Like it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in the scene that we're talking about, Cayman himself even says that like
Hmm.
now is the time for men. Like
Hmm.
this is the time for men. So it's like in
Hmm.
their eyes, they're like again being held back by the Valar and the elves, and like they think that they should be able to go to Middle Earth and take what they want, and that they, they're just as powerful as they are, and they want to prove that they are, again, like, this is the age of men, like, we're big and bad, right? And you bring up a really great point with the Pelentíri, that what we're going to talk about with Míriel. So we also see Elendil meets with Míriel, who he basically is like, yo, you need to get this shit together. You need to gather up the faithful, which again is just people who are still, I don't want to say loyal, but, still follow the old ways of being friends with elves, all that good stuff. And she asks him what he saw in the Pelentíri. So last episode, he touched it and kind of blew him back. And he tells her that all he saw was him riding away from the city. But if we remember, flashback to season 1, when Míriel looks into the Pelentíri, she sees the destruction of Númenor. She sees Númenor being engulfed by this huge flood. So when he tells her that, she takes that to mean that the vision, that the future of Númenor has changed, and that it's not going to be destroyed anymore. So she tells him not to do any. So she's like, don't do shit, dude, because you're going to mess this up and we're all going to die. So I thought that was, again, really cool. And it really adds a lot to Míriel's character, I think, because ever since season, she has, everything she's done has been over the influence of this vision of destruction. And now she thinks that this has been prevented. But what do you think, Zach? Do you think that the vision has changed, or is this just another viewpoint of the vision?
I agree with that second part of that. I feel like that's another viewpoint. I feel like they probably got two different perspectives of whatever the vision was, and that was his and hers was hers, and you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like things changed. I think it was more just what he saw was what he was supposed to see. You know what I mean? And I don't think I do think something has to happen. You feel me? Because I feel like I feel like she might be wrong in that instance of just like, yo, don't do anything. Like, because I feel like what he's seen was just what he said. He just was riding away like that. I don't feel like that. He could be riding away after that happened. You know what I mean? Like that.
True.
You don't know what the perspective was. You know.
Well, we see that she was kind of wrong already in this episode because of what happens to the faithful in this next scene. But really, excuse me, really quickly, I just want to say, I'll make this very, very quick, but for people who may be interested and don't feel like doing Google searches or whatever, so the thing that we're talking about, that Pelentíri, that is the black orb that they see the visions from. People who have seen the original trilogy will remember it from Saruman. He had a Pelentíri and Pippin touched it. But what the Pelentíri is it's a stone that was made by the elves. A lot of people think that it was actually made by Feanor, who is the greatest elven smith that they refer to many times in Eregion. And it was a gift to the Númenorians. And basically what these do is they're almost like a FaceTime, like, if you would. Like, so each stone corresponds to the other stones. And if a stone is in your possession, you can basically use it to see through the other stone. And this kind of gets confusing because really it only works if, like, so like, say the stone is facing you, I could see you, right? But I couldn't see like the whole room around you, right? So it's like very limited view. And it also allows the user to see things that are either far ahead into the future or far away into the past, but doesn't have any influence over it. It's more just kind of a little snippet, if you would, of like, what, could happen. So that's why, like, that's kind of like the importance of it. Why when they touch it, they get these kind of, like, they are vision of the future, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's set in stone either. Like, it's possibilities of future, and same thing with the past. And so again, they can be used as sort of surveillance tools. In, again, the original trilogy that we see, that's how Sauron is using it with Pippin. That's why when Pippin touches it, Sauron is able to see him, because again, it kind of is almost like a FaceTime. If it's pointing in your direction, they can see you. So I that was even longer than I wanted it to be, but that's what that stone is, right? And
Okay.
that's why people are freaked out about it. And again, going back to the whole beef with the elves, like they don't trust it. And going back to the faithful and how Míriel was wrong, we see the faithful are basically holding a funeral for everyone that was lost in Middle Earth, including Isildur. So we have Elendil's there, our boy Valandil, who is one of my favorite characters. He's there. And Kemen shows up, and basically what his father asked him to do was to go and get all these faithful people out of this. It's not like a monument. I don't know what word you would use for it, like a holy site, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just a dick. Kamen's just an asshole, dude. He's like, y'all need to get out of here. And there's an old priest who's basically like, yo, like, let me just grab our, statue or whatever. And he breaks it. A fight ensues. Elendil punches him in the face, which was just like so gosh dang satisfying. And then Valandil steps in and he fights with Kemen, which I want to bring up very quickly. Little Easter egg for you. Kemen takes his sword out and comes at Valandil with the sword, but Valandil does a quick little 1-2 dodge. He's swiping through it. Those are actually moves that he learned from Galadriel in season 1. If I forget the episode, but if you guys remember from season 1, when Galadriel's in Númenor, there's this really fun scene where she's like kind of fighting with the people, the soldiers, and she's just like dodging all of their swords, and she says to them like, you need to be quick, and whatever she says. But we see him put that into practice here with Kemen as he dodges and swipes through Kamen's stabs and is able to get the sword from him. But big but.
Yeah.
It does not end well for our man. Kemen comes in, stabs him in the back. This is why early a couple minutes ago I said I freaking hate this guy, because what a rat. I hate it. Take me off my tangents and tell me your thoughts on this.
I'm gonna say, man, I feel like the Númenor sections of this episode had to be my favorite. This scene, one of the best scenes in the episode to me. I want to say, like, just that whole conflict, because I was waiting for him, and he was just talking so crazy to what's my guy name, Elendil, the whole time, and I'm just like, nah, they have to do something, and it felt like it took him a little bit of time to react, because like he wanted to hit him the first time, he didn't do it, and he dropped the statue. It was like, all right, bro, like, nah, we we about to get to it, and it was just on and popping after that, and I just, like you said, man, the actor's doing such a great job, because you just hate that character so much. And then the fact that he spared him, and then he still stabbed him in the back, like that was just so. I'm like, bro, really? That's what type of time you on? Like, okay.
See, and that's why I said like Valandil, even though he's like, we don't get as much, like he was in season 1, but unfortunately, I'd say like a minor character, and also kind of a minor character in this season. But the reason why I love him is I feel like he perfectly, like he is a true soldier of Númenor, right? Like in the first season, we see like he is kind of at odds with Isildur, who they're like they're like best friends. But he's kind of at odds with him because he's like, you don't take this shit seriously. And I have worked my entire life to be part of this Sea Guard and to be like a Sea Guard of Númenor. Like he takes that title so seriously. And then he goes off to Middle Earth. He fights in this war. Again, like something he's dreamed about, sees the horrors of war, sees like what, war is actually like, comes back home, and now like his own people are trying to overthrow the queen, and it's like he's steadfast, right? I feel like he does not waver on his beliefs. He knows what his morals are, and he is, again, I think he's just a true man of Númenor. So when he dies in this episode, and especially like to me, he exemplifies the best of Númenor. So for him to be stabbed in the back, like such a cowardly way, ooh, that hurt. Ooh, I was pissed, dude. I was pissed.
Same, bro. Like I didn't. I wonder how they're gonna get some get back for this, because this can't go unanswered, man. I know we got to get some type of revenge
Dude,
eventually.
we need justice for Valandil, and I want to shout out the
Facts.
actor Alex Tarrant. Alex Tarrant, again, phenomenal in season 1, phenomenal season 2. Even though not one of the main characters, really a character that stood out to me. And again, we need vengeance for Valandil. Karen, what's Kemen? Your days
Yeah,
are
Cameron.
numbered, my friend. You are
Right.
freaking numbered. Like, I am out for blood after that because that made me so upset. But then we see again, another reason why your days are freaking numbered, Cayman, is he blames it all on Elendil. He says that he started the whole uprising and it orders them to take him away.
Crazy. It feel like they plotting on him, man. I feel like ever since that first scene in this episode, when they see how loyal the soldiers are still to him, even after there's a power play.
Yes.
I feel like they're really trying to snuff him out from the jump. It's like, nah, we're not gonna let this happen, because like they were trying to stop it. They're like, yeah, y'all need to stand down. It's like, nah, he's still our captain. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
feel like all of this is like them trying to really get that out of there so they can really take control over Númenor.
Yeah, because I feel like we see in the scenes of like I think it was episode 1, 2, one of those, where
Mm-hmm.
like Míriel is doing her regency or whatever. I feel like
Right.
the people of Númenor, like your average citizens, the ones that we don't really see, like just kind of see in the crowd, feel like they're like very divided. Like we have like some of them are like I don't know about Pharazone, but then other ones are like hell yeah, dude. Pharazone is that dude. And something
Mm-hmm.
else we saw in season 1 when he like speaks to the people and kind of is like, yo, like let's all calm down, right? So, and that's a great scene that we kind of glossed over, didn't really mention, is like you said, the Sea Guard stands with Elendil and came and
Mm-hmm.
realizes like, oh, like we don't have everyone, right? Everyone's not on board with us. So
Mm-hmm.
that worries me to see what they're going to do next to persuade everybody else, right? Because it definitely seems that's the name of the game. They're trying to, which again, I think goes back to my point of what I was talking about, like Sauron's influence infecting everyone. Like we see Pharazone trying to kind of influence Númenor in similar ways that Anatar is in Eregion. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we need to all come together to fight this common enemy, and like they're gonna all, which I mean, we see a lot in the real world today. It's
Yeah.
your classic
Yeah.
case of like, oh, they're the bad guy, and we need to get them before they get us, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like the people of Númenor are just in such a ripe place for those kind of ideas to take hold.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm excited and worried to see where they take the Númenor, the rest of the Númenorians as we move forward, because it is not looking good for the faithful. They are probably as down bad as they could be right now.
Nah,
So
exactly.
I don't know what's going to happen to them. I can't wait. Next episode, like we said, it seems like they're kind of switching off episode between episodes. So I would assume that
Mm-hmm.
next episode is going to be very elf centered. We'll probably meet back up with a Rondir and a Isildur. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe another 2 episodes before we get back to Númenor and see the outcome of all this. But
Right.
I agree with you. I think for me, Númenor is probably one of my favorite parts of this season so far. I'll say too, I feel like we're getting a lot. Again, people who have read the books, if you Google Númenor, you'll see what I'm alluding to. It's not a big secret, but I still want to keep some sense of and alive, right? But
Right.
where they end up, we're seeing how it gets there, and I think the show is doing a really great job of like showing us those signs.
I
But
agree.
that
I have no knowledge of that, but I definitely
good.
feel
I'm
like
glad I
it's just
didn't say
all,
anything then.
you know what I mean? Yeah, domino.
Yeah, like I said, it's so hard to talk about some of this stuff sometimes because it's like, again, I'm not gonna say it because if y'all want to know, just literally Google Númenor, you'll see what I'm talking about. But like the only book about Númenor basically says what what happens to Númenor. But
Mm-hmm.
to end off this episode, there's nothing to really talk about here, but just how the episode ends off. Elrond, we're talking at the top of this episode, like, why does it take the elves to get so long to get places? Elrond finally makes it to Lindon, who's basically running through the woods this entire episode, and he gets there and tells Gil-galad that his emissaries are dead. The message never got to Celebrimbor, and basically sets them off to go to Eregion and help them. But like we said at the top of this hour, I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it gave us a lot of interesting things that are definitely going to be addressed later on in this. Like, really, I feel like we talked about this in House of the Dragon, whereas in House of the Dragon, it felt like the season was, building us up to this, finale, and kind of, fizzled out from there. I feel like we're in a similar situation here, but it's like amped up tenfold. Like every episode, I feel like we're building to this big climax, and I feel like this episode really sets us up for these last 3 episodes, which, I mean, hopefully we're not in another House of the Dragon situation, but am I wrong? Like, do you feel similar? Do you feel like it feels like we're leading up to something big in these last 2 episodes?
I definitely do, bro. Like, I feel like, again, like I said this on past episodes that we got together, like, I do feel like this season has been a jump forward for me, just quality wise. Not quality wise, because obviously it's a high quality show, but like just story wise, I feel like this season has been a lot better to me than the previous season, and I just feel like it's every episode is just elevating even more. Like even with this episode not being as action packed, we still got a lot of plot movement, which I still enjoyed like a lot. So I feel like they're close in tier as far as how I feel about them, and I feel like it's only going to get better as we keep going forward to the end of the season. Personally,
Yeah,
that's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you would agree with me on this too. I think we've both said this on the show, but I love every episode better than the last. Like every time I'm like, oh man, that was great. It was way better than last week. And I think that the show is doing such a great job, again, keeping that tension throughout, where it always feels tense, right? Like things feel dire for everybody. Like the Númenorians, like the faithful need to be saved. The elves need to get to Eregion, right? It's like there's just this tension. And I think that they're just doing such a great job in displaying that out and like keeping us on the edge of our seat. And it's so fun, man. It's just so fun. And I cannot wait to see where this all ends up. I hope all of you watching and listening are excited for the next one as well. We will be back next week covering the whole episode, going deep and nerdy. You can hear more about Pelentíris, the Doors of Durin, all that nerdy stuff. And before we get out of here, I want to give my man Zen, please tell the people, as always, where they can find you. What do we got coming up? I know you're cooking on some stuff, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, you can find me at Army Zen. It's right there at the bottom. On all social media platforms. Make sure to check out Listen 3000. We just dropped the episode not too long ago. We had our guy Taz on there, so shout out to Taz. And yeah, it's obviously it's Agent Fandom situation. We got a lot of stuff coming soon with agents. Penguin's coming up. You know what I mean? Agatha's coming up. They going live with that. So it's gonna be a lot of good times, man. I'm excited for all the new nerdy stuff that we got going on, man. So yeah, I'm here.
Absolutely. Zen said it perfectly. If you're not already, follow Agents of Fandom on all of our socials. Agents Fandom on TikTok and Twitter. Agents of Fandom pretty much everywhere else. Be sure to tune in. We are going to be having a live Agatha show. So after the new episodes of Agatha All Along, come right over to Agents of Fandom and join us live to break down and discuss all the new episodes. We are also going to be having some great Penguin content as well. We got some really great guests lined up for that. So as well as Agatha, be sure to tune into Penguin on HBO and then come over to Agents of Fandom. Check out our after show on that as well. You most likely will be seeing me and Zen pop up on both of those shows at least a couple times. And as far as this, please consider giving us a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and we will see you guys all next time.